Do you sometimes wonder how you could truly have an impact when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? How do you know you are moving in the right direction when it comes to becoming a more inclusive individual? As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod brings topics such as ethnicity, genders, sexuality, religion on the table. We talk about research and science, but also emotions, feelings, and vulnerability. We discuss allyship, advocacy, privilege, but most importantly, we talk action. Because without action, we stay still. And when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, stillness is never the answer. Welcome to As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. In this episode of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod, I have the pleasure to welcome Jaimie Sherling. Jaimie is a joy seeker, drag ambassador, and the founder and designer of YAASSS Sweets, a clothing line created for sister breast cancer survivors. She lives in Wisconsin with her two kids. And when she is not working at her day job or trying on piles of clothes at thrift stores, you can find her screaming yes, surrounded by a bunch of queens. She's a cancer survivor, a speaker, and the author of From Queens to Queens, How the Madison Drag Community Saved My Life. And I am extremely grateful to have had the chance to welcome Jaimie in this latest episode of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Okay, so welcome to another episode of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. I'm very excited today to welcome Jaimie Sherling. I think we're going to have an amazing conversation. So Jaimie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Julian.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to get to visit with you.
Me too, definitely. I can't wait to hear all about you and your story and everything you're doing at the moment as well. So, yep. Looking forward to it. And I'm going to start actually with that question I always ask, because I think it's a way to get to know you, but with your own words rather than me sharing a bio that is out there that everybody can read, but rather hearing about your stories. What is your story, Jaimie?
I wear many hats like a lot of us do. I'm a mother, I am a sister and daughter, I am a cancer survivor, I'm also a thriver, and I'm a current patient. I am an author and a clothing line designer.
A lot of things indeed.
Yeah.
And so I would say well, yeah, as you said, there are many hats, different hats there. And one question I want to ask you, because obviously that's one of the main topics from this podcast, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Where do all these hats fit in that overall picture?
I think doing my best to always be thinking of diversity and equity and inclusion, whether it's the way I have raised my children. I've worked hard that from the time they were babies, that both for them and whatever their sexuality or gender might be, that we accept you, we love you as you are. So raising them that way, and then having important discussions, having discussions about the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, having discussions about Dr. Martin Luther King and his work. And it's changed, of course, over the years. And now my children are teenagers, so we can have more thought-provoking discussions. And I'm glad we're having the discussions. I think they're necessary. And I think more people are having more discussions that weren't happening years ago. At least I don't remember those kinds of discussions when I was growing up. And then it goes from there.
And I would agree with you. Actually, we can see how those discussions are. I was going to say easier. That's not the right word. I think they're not easier in terms of the depth of the discussions, but they're probably easier to have with the people around you. And I think you're right, people are more open. For me, one example is actually thinking about my aunt, who is in the LGBTQ community. And um, only for the last 3 or 4 years, I've started having discussions with her about what was her
Mm.
experience and what was it like. And I grew up knowing about it, but we were just not talking about it. And I'm glad, because actually I'm much closer to her now than I probably was before. I mean, I was always quite close to her, but I'm close at a different level, at a more personal level. So I agree with you.
Mhm. I agree completely that when you have the discussions change so many things, because you can read a book, great. You can maybe even watch a film, a documentary, but I feel like if you're really talking with people in a certain community, whether it's people of color, the Black community, LGBTQIA plus, whatever the community is, if you're actually having discussions with them
Mhm.
about their lives and, like you said, their experiences, it's, I think, completely different than reading and trying to learn in a vacuum.
One question, because you mentioned about your kids and them being teenagers and the conversations changing and being maybe more challenging as well. And I'm thinking, okay, I have two young girls. They are not teenagers yet, but it's gonna come quickly, probably. So, what are some of these challenging conversations you're having with them at the moment?
Well, and I think some of the conversations, I feel like a lot of them can actually happen all along as they grow up. It's
Hmm.
just different. So, like, I think of the in the film, in the from the lens of consent, very, very important,
Yeah.
and important to me just in general, but I do know just statistically there are more men that seem to perpetrate crimes
Hmm.
relating to consent, and one of my children is a son. So just teaching that from that perspective is I have to be part of the solution. And I feel like that topic of consent can start when they're little. It's just different. You're not maybe
Hmm.
talking about a sexual encounter, but can I give you a hug? Can I hold your hand? And, like, simple, like, you're taking some of the same principles, but you're making them child appropriate for their age. And then I think it is easier if you've had some of these discussions when they're little, then as they get older,
Hmm.
you're just having more sophisticated discussions.
No, that's very true, actually, and it's a good point you're raising here, because I think one of the things we sometimes tend to forget is that we need all the sides. And as you said, it's not about talking about consent for, well, my I have two daughters, so it's not just about talking about it in that context, but as well it's talking about it for the other gender,
Mm-hmm.
and what does that mean, and how do they see it as well, and why is it important? Because again, this is not something I think we're necessarily born with in terms of conversations. It's not something that is probably taught that much throughout education as well. So we have that responsibility as parents to make sure that all these topics are being discussed. You're right.
Thank you. It's we have a like you said, we have a responsibility to raise the next generation
Hmm.
in ways that we want them to make choices that we are happy about and make them their strongest, best selves.
Mm. No, definitely. And so thinking about your life and your experiences, what were some of these challenges that you've encountered throughout your experiences in terms of being included and feeling like you belonged, and what has it taught you now that you can pass on to that next generation?
I think I had a unique experience being, not only I was raised Catholic, but I also went to Catholic schools from the
Hmm.
time I was kindergarten, maybe first grade, all the way until high school. And then I went to a public high school.
Yep.
And I think it can skew your mindset because you're there. And I don't really remember us really learning about other religions. It was mostly, this is a Catholic
Mhm.
school, so we're going to make sure you know everything about Catholicism, which I wish we had learned more. And I think that's a change now, seeing my children in public schools. And for the most part, I think their educators work hard to talk about many different cultures, to talk about many different religions, to learn from other people. And because again, when we have that experience of knowing and learning from others, it's deeper than, sure, anybody could read. Well, maybe not everybody can read books. Not everyone has that privilege, but a lot of people can read a book. But actually having discussions and maybe even having seminars and workshops and things that where different people come onto a panel. So I work for a nonprofit, and we actually just had a panel with my colleagues to celebrate the Lunar New Year. And it was amazing. I learned so many things about the Lunar New Year. And one of the people who's a colleague of mine actually had his mother on the call. And it was so adorable, but it was also so educational. And again, I learned more about the Lunar New Year than I ever knew. I mean, I knew this, not really anything, where I think I knew something about wearing red, and I knew that the years have the animal names. So I knew a teensy bit, but actually hearing from someone speaking and getting questions and answering them, it was incredible.
Mm. It's very interesting, actually, you're saying that, because I had exactly the same experience with the group I'm part of a few days ago with someone as well, talking about, and it's a coaching group. So she was talking about even the new year in the context of how can we relate it to coaching and the work we do as coaches with our clients. And it was fascinating. And I love as well you mentioning about bringing other generations in the mix as well, because obviously we can learn from them, and they have their own experiences and their own journeys as well to share that are different to ours. So that must have been very interesting indeed.
It was great. It was one of the best calls I'd been on in a long time.
And when we tend to forget actually sometimes about all these cultures as well, because I mean, if we think about the Lunar New Year, that's something that is probably more and more common. We see it, especially in big cities where there is a more maybe culturally diverse population. So we see it, but we forget sometimes to stop and to ask and to be curious about what does that really mean, because it's there and it feels it's like part of our surroundings, but there is, as you said, so much we can still learn, because we know so little quite often about it, unless we've been raised in that community or we've been part of that community for a long time, or we have very close people. But I think that's a very good I think it's a very good lesson we can take out of that, to stop and be curious about it and ask questions and learn more.
That's my favorite part, is the ask, because you can even see it, maybe there's a parade that's related to the Lunar New Year and you can watch it, but that's completely different than sitting down with someone and saying, well, what about this? And what does this mean? And why do you do that? And why do you do this? So it's great to have that opportunity and to be in someone's space that they're so willing to answer questions.
No, definitely. And so I was reading a little bit more about you the other day, and I saw that you wrote a book as well. I mean, you mentioned about it being an author. Tell me a little bit more about that book.
I did. So
It has a very exciting title to start with.
I love that. So it's funny because I came up with the title fairly early on in the process, thinking, I don't know if I'm going to keep this title or not. But then every time I told someone, I had the reaction of either, ooh, that's a good title. Or some of the people who are featured in the book would say, aw. So the title of the book is From Queens to Queens: How the Madison Drag Community Saved My Life.
So how did that title come to life?
Well, it's really a love letter to this community, and it is a play on words. So the From Queens to Queens, because I spent the first 7 years of my life in Queens, New York.
Yep.
So it's my journey. So it's from actual Queens, New York to these queens in that community. And I said at the very beginning that I had cancer. And so this community was really, really there for me during some very tough times along my cancer journey. And I just wanted other people to hear about it.
Mhm. And so I here I think, I mean, in already in the title we hear that inclusion and that belonging again that is coming in. So how was it for you actually to be part of that community?
So I really struggled. So when I first started going, like the very first time I went to this place, Five Nightclub, it's one of my favorite places to see drag where I live. And I went because a friend asked me to be a backup dancer in a drag show pageant.
Okay.
I had never seen a drag show. I knew drag existed, but never seen a
Hmm.
show, never watched an episode of RuPaul's Drag Race. And of course, my immediate answer was yes. So I went to Five Nightclub on a Saturday afternoon where it was the lights were on. It wasn't your typical, show time or anything. It was pretty
Hmm.
quiet and calm, and started learning choreography. And I met some other drag queens, and I met them not as drag queens. So I met them as
Yeah.
Dan, Michael, and Jacob. They were wearing workout clothes, and that's how I met them. So I have a unique experience in that basically it's like I met people who happen to do drag, and then I saw them in
Hmm.
drag. So I think that's very different than most people who just go to a drag show and you'd see this drag queen. So I got to know them as friends. And there were times I struggled because at the time I identified as straight. I do not anymore. But at the time I did. And I was married to a man. And so there was going to this space and I'm thinking, am I really allowed to be here? Am I allowed to be in
Hmm.
this LGBTQ plus friendly environment if I'm not? And different people have different takes on that maybe you shouldn't, and it's okay.
Hmm.
And I think there are a number of people have different opinions. And I just went anyway. And no one asked me not to come. So I thought, well, I'm coming and no one's telling me not to. So I guess I'll keep coming. And then more and more and more, getting to be friends with more people. And it's just this realization of, oh, I guess I am just allowed to be here.
That's fascinating indeed, because I think, yeah, I think a lot of people would ask themselves that question: do I really belong here, and should I
Mhm.
be here? And in your opinion, what made the difference actually that you felt included
Well, I
with
think
this
when I
community?
first started going, I was being invited by them. So maybe that made it different
Yeah.
too, that I didn't just look up this queer establishment and decide to start going,
Hmm.
which other people do. And you can argue whether that's okay or not. But for me, it was, well, my friend who is in this community is inviting me to be here. So if I'm
Yeah.
being invited to be here, and I think too, if you are going to do that, that it's important that you're going to be respectful, you're going to be kind, which I'm going to do anyway. But yeah, if someone were to come to a drag show and be laughing at the performers or making fun of the performers or being homophobic or transphobic, well, you should get out. Like,
Hmm.
you should not be allowed here. But my thought was, it's almost like I am a guest, so I'm going to be my usual self, but I'm going to be respectful and be kind. I'm going to
Hmm.
know that I am a guest here. So I don't know. Like I
But
said, no one ever told me not to come anymore.
but it's very interesting actually, because I'm reading this book at the moment, a great book called The Four Levels of Psychological, the Four Stages of Psychological Safety. And the first one actually, which is very interesting, is that inclusion safety. Um, and the way it's described is pretty much, how do you kind of open the doors to your world with no judgment, no assumption, and just, as you said, invite people in, and invite them just because they're a human being, and that's it. And then how do you make them psychologically safe is probably what you were mentioning about those next steps and being reinvited and feeling part of the community and so on. But the first step that we tend to forget to do sometimes is just open the doors and say, you're welcome. Whoever you are, you're welcome. And here you are. And in your whole being, and that's good. That's good enough. There is no judgment behind it.
Makes sense. Well, I think too, I'm thinking a lot of people who are in that queer community, if they're going to invite someone who is straight, they're probably going to invite somebody that they are friends with, that they do know them pretty well, and that they know they are not homophobic or transphobic. And
Yep.
because if they knew someone who was that way, then maybe they wouldn't invite them. Say, we don't want that energy here. But if you're here as an ally, if you're going to be here and be supportive, come on in.
And one thing I was thinking about, because you mentioned earlier about your upbringing in quite a Catholic with the Catholic background. How did you personally reconcile the two? Because quite often these are two concepts that tend to clash quite often for most people, and not agree with each other. Although I would personally have a different opinion with it, but how about you? How did that work out, kind of bringing these two worlds together for you?
For me, I think at the end of the day, about the person, the Savior, the person who is Jesus, that if you look at the teachings, if you really look at the teachings of turning the other cheek and being kind to others and accepting all, and some of the stories from the Bible, thinking, so that person was all about love, right? So if we're acting in a way that's hurting other people or trying to take away their rights, are we really being loving?
And it's a good way. It's a good question to ask ourselves, indeed.
I think there are a lot of people who can use religion to justify things that maybe doesn't even really go along with the basis of the religion.
Yeah, and you and I talked a little bit about it in the past as well. But yes, I think there is that that really interesting idea behind how actually some of these teachings have transpired into our modern world in ways that are not necessarily always from the original readings, at least, that have been, let's put it very straightforward, have been badly translated, or have been maybe translated in ways that kind of helped people pass the message they wanted to, which was not necessarily always the original message, as you said, of love and kindness, and and loving the people around you. And so you in your book, obviously, you talk about your journey and your story as well. And you talk a little bit about as well some of the challenges that you went through. Tell us a little bit more about what are some of these these learnings that you've had, that people, the listeners, people around us, could take for being more inclusive, the same way the community you were talking about has done for you, actually. What are some of the things we can concretely do differently?
I feel like one thing you can do is to really get to know, if there's any way possible, to try and get to know people who are in communities that are different from you. So you can learn from them. So you can, and if, again, this may not be possible, at least not immediately, but if possible, to have discussions, to sit down together and learn. And you'll find, sure, of course, some ways that you're like, but to really learn about their lived experiences, you can see things can be very, very different. And then from there, can you be part of the solution? How can you help so the world is a better place?
Definitely. And it's interesting you're saying that, because when you were saying, okay, if it is possible, but I think we live in a world where there is so much out there that is available, that even if we can't always necessarily have the direct conversations with someone, because we don't have anyone in our communities. I mean, the example I have all the time is if you wanted to learn more about BIPOC communities in Romania, you probably would struggle a little bit because there are not a lot of black, brown people of color around us. And
Mhm.
that's because of the way this society is. But actually, and with some of the work I do, even being based in Romania, I have this contact, I have this interaction with people that might be somewhere else across the world. So if you really want to make it happen, I think it's possible. But I think the basics already is you can actually do your research online. It's so easy these days to just go
Mhm.
and see what are some of the challenges. I mean, I was talking to the episode, actually one of the episodes I released recently was about mental health, and actually with a link to the LGBT plus community. And I didn't know much about it, but I found so much information online, and then I could obviously have more of a conversation with my guest at the time. But it started with that knowledge is out there already, and of course you have to filter it
Mhm.
sometimes because not everything
Right.
is
Accurate.
exactly, yeah, accurate and perfect. But if you
Mhm.
start looking a little bit, at least you can start with the right questions instead of starting from a completely blank page, and you can start having these conversations with people. So I think that's a great advice, actually, to go and reach out to people and learn more about it as well.
Thank you.
Hmm. And so one of the things, I'm being conscious of time as well, and making sure that we cover everything. One of the things, I want to ask the question, actually, if what you're wearing is part of your collection as well.
It is
But
not.
no,
So what I
but
am wearing is a gift from a drag queen. Actually, that queen who asked me to be a backup dancer in that drag show pageant, the very first one, this was a gift. So Josh passed this jacket along to me.
I love it. It's like it's
Thanks.
colorful.
It's
It's
fun.
joyful. It's fun. Exactly. But now, so what I wanted to ask you is one of your latest endeavors, which been a few years, I believe, already, is you creating your own line of clothing, I believe.
Yes, I designed it. So I designed it,
So
and other people actually did the production.
so where did that come from? How come you decided to start in to go into that direction?
It started from my life experience. So I have breast cancer, and I had had a double mastectomy in the
Mm-hmm.
summer of 2018, and I did not do reconstructive surgery. And for a little while, I wore these items. They're called prosthetics, different way of
Mm-hmm.
wearing something under your clothes. Did that, and then decided I didn't want to because I had had a lot of pain from radiation. So I was just wearing
Mm-hmm.
a big t-shirt and then needed to go to the store and thought, well, I guess I'm just wearing this. And at this moment of, oh, I guess nobody really cares that I'm walking around in a shirt and that no one can see maybe that my body is what it is. And I started wearing the clothes that I had, and I found that a lot of them didn't fit the way I wanted them to,
Mm-hmm.
because most clothes made for women have space for that body part, and I didn't like how they fit. And then I did some searches thinking, well, is there a clothing line kind of for us, so to speak? And there was not. So I started thinking about it and made the realization that, well, maybe I can dive into this. And that's how it all started.
And so what do you do now? What's the plan? Where are you out with all
So right
this?
now, I am wanting to focus on sharing the inventory that I have.
Mm-hmm.
So I was ready to launch in March of 2020, which we all know what March of 2020 was like. And so I didn't. So I
Yes.
waited until September and shared then. But I'd like to share what I already have in different ways, just because I still feel like it takes a while for
Mm-hmm.
the idea, for the recognition to come and all of that. So that's the current plan. And I know a few
And
shops in town that could like carry some of the pieces and have a little note next, especially in town, because it can be this is made by someone local and
Mm.
have that extra appeal.
And we'll definitely share that as well with the listeners, and put some links as well for people to go and have a look. But what I find very interesting with that part of the story is, again, it links so well again with that inclusion and that belonging, because it is about realizing, okay, there is something that is missing. There is a group out there, a community that is missing something. We haven't thought about them. We haven't included them in the way we're thinking. And here we're talking about fashion, but there are so many other ways, I'm sure, for other communities as well, where there are things that are missing. And it's, how do we bring again that missing piece and make sure these people feel like they are included as well when it comes to the way they're going to dress and what they should be wearing, and that will ultimately make them feel good themselves and feel like they belong as part of the wider community as well.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And I find that fascinating, and I'm so happy actually we're having this conversation, because it is exactly what it's about. It is about these different elements from your journey and how they all fit together, and there is that central thing again of that inclusion and that belonging, which I love.
I think at the end of the day, we all want to feel like we belong.
Mm-hmm.
We all want to be included in either, whether it's the group we're already, a group that we identify with, or just as someone in the society or the world. You want to feel like you belong.
I agree totally, but it's difficult sometimes, especially when you don't have the things that help you
Oh, definitely.
feel like you belong. And I'm glad you're doing some of that work out there as well in helping that, so thanks a lot.
You're welcome, and thank you. I will say too, there are definite, it's a small group that I'm in, because I think there are so many people, just society in generally, but then also doctors, that if a woman makes this decision to have a mastectomy, it's almost this foregone conclusion that of course you're going to have reconstruction, of course you'll
Mm-hmm.
do that, and that if you don't have breasts, then you're not a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And which of course is completely untrue, because I don't, and I definitely am. So, but that can be a thought process for women who are in that stage of making a decision. And I think it's terrible actually that some doctors have went above and beyond to say, you really want to make this decision, you really want to have reconstruction, because I'm thinking, you don't know my life experience, and you don't know that for certainty, and to put that on them to say, if you don't make this choice, you can no longer identify with the group you have always probably identified with. So I think that's
that
problematic.
that is very interesting point actually here, because and the first thing that came to my mind actually was thinking, do these tend to be any gender telling you this, or does it tend to be more men?
I feel like I never heard it, and I had a wonder. I mean, having cancer wasn't great, don't get me wrong, but overall, I had a wonderful experience. And I will say, my doctor, my surgeon, didn't try to dissuade me at all. They
Mm-hmm.
pushed to have the meeting. So, I had different tests, and then I did meet with a plastic surgeon. So it was a possibility. But then once I met with the plastic surgeon, and then I decided I was making this decision, my doctor didn't, there was no discussion of maybe this isn't a good idea or anything, who was a man, is a
Mm-hmm.
man, and none of that. Well, and the real thing that I get very angry when I think about it, there are women, I've heard the stories, that they have decided they want to have a mastectomy and they're not planning on reconstructive surgery. That is a decision they've made. They tell their
Mm-hmm.
doctor, and then they have the surgery, and the doctor leaves, basically like leaves fat there. meaning in the thought process that you might change your mind later.
Mm. And
And
we're looping back to that idea of consent from before, of
mm-hmm.
ultimately it's a decision that you have to take as the person who is in that situation. There is no one else that can take that decision for
Right.
you.
And if you've made that decision already, have made it clear, and then a doctor just decides to ignore your wishes as a patient, I think is terrible.
I
So
agree.
I had nothing like that, which I am very grateful.
Well, I'm hoping that anyone who is listening, if they have people around them that are in these situations where they are giving advice to their patients and so on, that they're going to be thinking a little bit as well about, okay, how do we support the decision from that patient and their will to do what they want to do with their body ultimately, but also not coming with judgment and not bringing some of these beliefs that we all have for sure, but that can be quite damaging for people, I think, in the way they are going through these experiences. So I hope
Absolutely.
if there are people
There's a
listening.
difference between sharing all the information. I do think that's important. I think it's important to talk about the positives and negatives of all, because with implants, sure, some women make that choice, great, but there are some risks involved. And that's not to say it's not a good decision. I'm not shaming the women who choose that, but I think it's important that they know that there are risks. So with every decision, your job is to inform, give the whole picture, and then let your patient decide based on what's right for them. But they can't really make a fair decision about what's right for them if they don't have all the information.
No, totally. And so we're coming to the end of our podcast and that amazing journey. I'll repeat it again, from Queens to Queens. I think if anyone's listening, they should definitely go and check out the book and learn more about your journey as well. But I'd like to ask you one last question. What would be like kind of one thing you would want to leave the listeners with?
What I would like to leave you with is, no matter what you are going through in life, because I think many, many times we go through hard things, whether it's cancer, divorce, somebody's death, and anything and everything in between, that if you can find things or people or circumstances that bring you joy, that you hang on to them. Just hang on to them really tightly. I think all of us in this world need some joy right now. So if you can find it, hang on tight.
Oh, that's a beautiful way to close this episode. So thank you so much. One last question I would want to ask you is, if anyone wants to reach out, get to know you more, what you're doing and so on, what's the best way for them to do that?
Can I give you 2 ways?
Yes, of course.
So 2, because it's different ways, but they're both great. So one is the website, YDYSweets.com. So it's just YDYSWEETS.com. YDY Sweets, you'll see the clothing lines there, ways to get my book, and just learn a little bit about me. The other thing is Instagram, but you have to spell my name right. So it's at Jaimie Sherling, but if you don't spell my name right, then you won't find me.
Well, I'll definitely put that in the notes so it's easy for people to find you and they don't make any mistakes when they look for you.
Yes.
And I'll put the website as well. So Jaimie, thank you so much again for being part of this episode. It was a pleasure to have you. And I look forward to seeing all the wonderful things that you're going to continue doing in this world. And congratulations.
Thank you so much, Julian. It was a joy to be on here. So thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. We'd love to hear from you. To catch all the latest from us, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at As Diverse as 2 Peas in a Pod. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.